your HR morning boost for this Tuesday, the 15th of July. We've already been having a huge blast behind the scenes. So I just need to let you know this conversation could go anywhere. I'm picking up a puppy today. Paula's going on holiday next week. Like, we're both very excited. I don't know what's going to happen. You're in for a treat. So as you join, please come in and say hello in the chat. Say good morning to us. Tell us what exciting things you have got going on, and do they compete with getting a puppy? I've mentioned it twice. It's not even been a minute. What are you going to do about it? It's going to happen again. So if you don't know me, my name is Djemil. My company is Be Unstoppable, and I help women in HR get unstuck and take fearless control of their careers. And I'm going to introduce Paula in a moment. Before I do that, I want to introduce you a little bit to You Life, who have brought us all together, brought this whole series together. And somehow, as well as doing great things like that, they also make insurance cool. So we need to celebrate that, because anyone who can make insurance cool, they're worth checking out. So there's going to be a link added to the chat. You should go and check them out. If you're already giving your employees income, health, dental protection, group life, they do it with, like, it's turbocharged. They've got a platform, loads of engagement. Check them out, see what is going on. And let's get going, Paula. I'm like, what is she going to say? But let's start off with, Paula, who are you? Let's introduce yourself to people.
Will do. Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, for saying I'm excited rather than hysterical in the week before annual leave, because obviously it's all totally under control and all I'm focusing on is floating to the airport. There's nothing to do before that, is there? So I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm an occupational psychologist, and I'm the founder of the Employee Experience Project. And we do all things culture, but we kind of do culture different, because I've been doing this for a long time and I'm sick of doing it the same old way that just does not work.
Yes, love that. And just to give you a heads up, when Paula started talking to me about our conversation today, a while ago now, like a year ago, I felt like personally affronted as an HR professional, because, like, values are life, aren't they? When you're an HR professional, it's like values are just what we do. So be prepared to have your mind change a little bit on this morning talking to Paula. Thank you for coming and saying hello in the chat. Who knows where the inspiration of our title came from? It's a song. The title of today's session is Values Don't Change, Culture, Systems Do. If you know the song that we are referring to, it's from the noughties, to give you a hint, because that's Paula's demographic. Put it in the chat and we'll see if you're on our vibe or not. So Paula, that's the title, right? Values don't change, culture, systems do. Approach culture change in a way that will actually work. So what is it that you have against values?
Loads. Where should we start? Well, so for me, I don't have anything against values themselves. I have my own. But for me, the thing about values is we've all got them, but we act when it comes to organizational values, like a bunch of words that we try and impose on other people are going to trump their personal values on a day-to-day basis. And so what I don't like about values is when we try and rob them for this kind of collective purpose that's imposed rather than co-created and agreed. And I don't mean we all agree those words are cool. I mean, we all agree that we live those words. And we try and use them to drive change, because actually, if we just have some aspirational, intentional words for people and we say, this is how we do it around here now, but everything about their day-to-day experience says, well, we actually still do it like this. Values have zero power in driving change. So they don't unite people, they don't really direct people, and they don't change the stuff that really influences how people behave on a day-to-day basis.
That's a great start. So is there anything that you do like about them? Maybe that...
So the situations that I see them work very well in my work is if you already have a culture that is working and perhaps you're about to start to go through some change, or you just want to keep the conversation about how we do things around here live, values are a great way of putting a wrapper around things that are already working. So they allow us to make sense of why things work as they are, and they allow us to be able to keep attention on doubling down and making sure that stays to work. Where I don't think they work is trying to create things that we haven't got already, really.
And it's that, I mean, I've seen it so often. You create the values, you go out and you do workshops, and you're like, what does it mean to you to be an employee here? And you get everyone's thoughts, and then you cement it into some phrases, and then you stick them up on the wall. And then, like you say, what then happens is that, like, their day-to-day general experience doesn't match those values. So those values really do then just become something that kind of stays on the wall and doesn't kind of get referred to. So what would you do differently?
Yeah. Well, so I suppose there's a few different shades of grey in terms of what you can do differently. The first thing you can do is, if you really want to use values, build them in a different way. So don't just get everyone in a room and say, if it was sunshine and rainbows, what are the things that we'd say around this? And kind of do that purely colleague happiness driven piece around words that are probably quite unattainable at the moment. So don't go too aspirational. Think about things that are one or two steps away from where you are now, and also think about what the business can actually offer. So what we notice is when people self-build values, or when they bring values to us and they're really getting them in trouble because people are peed off actually that we've promised these things and we're not delivering them, is they've gone too far in the future, they've gone too aspirational, and it's just, these are all the things that we hate about here now, and let's flip it into words that are the opposite of that. So don't do that. First of all, think about what can the business actually reasonably offer in the next one or two steps, and what does the business really need from people. So think about the business need in context first, because that wins over everything. All businesses are there to deliver something, and that wins. So consider that, and then ask people, well, what do we need to be to deliver that in the next 1 or 2 years? So just make them more reasonable in the way that you build them. Or honestly, I would really encourage you to blow them up. And instead of thinking about that idea of what does the business need you to be through the values, start to think about building a balanced deal. Go back to the mechanics of the psychological contract and say, what is it that we need from you in order to deliver what this business needs, but what will you get in return? So basically what you're doing is really clearly articulating the deal of what makes it worth it for me to apply my energy in the way that you need me to allow this business to succeed, because you're telling me what I'm going to get back from the business. So expressing, instead of that top down, honestly, 1980s version of this is what you've got to do for the business, into a more modern expression of this is what we need you to give, but this is what you'll get in return, or this is how we'll help you deliver that to make it feel as easy and effective as possible. That is a much more helpful conversation. And it's also one that you can keep live. That's an easier one to evolve over time, because it's not suddenly 5 or 6 static words that we need to all kind of praise and worship. Instead, it's this live conversation about how does it feel around here, and how are we working together to make this an efficient, effective, and a connected place that everybody's satisfied to deliver great things.
I really love that. Tell me, and before we go on, but tell me in the chat if you have organizational values, what they are. I'd love to see the kind of similarities, because I'm putting a bet on the kind of things that I would see in there. Yeah, so tell me in the chat if your company does have organizational values, if you are thinking of introducing them, if you like hate them, like tell me what they are in there, and let's see what similarities we've got. So I really love that, Paula, as an approach between like the mutuality of that, because I guess in my experience, I've seen values quite often used as a kind of a punitive thing in a lot of ways, almost
Yeah.
a way of saying of giving someone an opportunity to say, well, their behavior doesn't align with my expectations and they don't live the values, so it's actually like just a way of someone having the vocabulary to say why they don't want someone in the business anymore. Like I don't see them used like kind of particularly positively, and that does tend to be like a top-down thing, doesn't it? Because so often you'll see, you're meant to follow these values, but the leadership team, well, there's another kind of set of values for them.
Feeds into one of the biggest challenges I think we have as HR professionals on this, is we build the values and then the leadership team look at us and go, okay, make everyone else go and do that. Like, they're not responsible for the tone of behavior, the way that the business runs. And I think the deal forces that bit around, okay, yeah, we need to get those people to do this, but actually, execs, SLT, this is how you need to show up, and this is the type of business that you need to run and create to allow people to do that. So that kind of reciprocity of behavior, and often the reason people aren't living the values is because the system and the decisions that are being made at a senior level are stopping them from living those values in general, whether that's about motivation or environmental nudges. So the idea of the deal is we're showing everybody that they've got a role in bringing this to life, rather than just saying, right, you go and do this now and live this. I don't have to, but you need to, really.
Yeah. And so thank you for adding your values to the chat. A few that I'm seeing coming up again, which I'm not surprised by. Care, there's collaboration, yeah, curiosity.
I've noticed quite a few JFDI ones, solution focused, resilient, things like that. It's like, oh, let's just figure it out, guys, get it done.
Is there a role of values in being competitive?
So there is, but I think the way that we currently express them, they don't consider context. That's one of the other big challenges with them. So let's take collaboration as an example. We're working with an organization at the moment where we're helping them reset their deal because they have just moved from being a single entity, well, just moved. In the last few years, they've moved from being a single entity organization. They've been acquired by a big multinational. And people are really struggling because the deal has fundamentally changed. They're suddenly working in a matrix environment. They're a lot more resource, but it's more complex, etc. So a value like collaboration still stands, but the operating context has changed absolutely and completely, because what it means to collaborate in a small family-owned business, or what was a small family-owned business, versus being in a massive matrix multinational is absolutely different. So they can look at the values and say they still stand, but people aren't delivering the way that we need them to. So the idea of working on deal making is that you can really start to think about this idea of context and how does this live in practice. And I think what we often try and do is create that context by saying we'll do our values, then we'll define our behaviours, but we end up with these really prescriptive then frameworks that are saying everybody needs to act exactly the same way. And that's not actually true. What we need is for everybody to align to the same outcome. So with that organisation, we've supported them around building a deal that's saying we need to live our values in a way that makes work feel and flow better, because they're struggling to feel good and they're struggling to push workflow through in a matrix environment. So suddenly the action planning for bringing those values to life moves from giving people training on team working, etc., into supporting them to build their network across the matrix, building their personal brand, influencing across countries, etc. So the value is exactly the same. The context has changed, and therefore the action that will, as soon as we start to consider context, the action that we use to bring that to life is massively different. And we're thinking about the enablement piece as well because of the deal bit. So it's that bit around anything behavioral or intention based can feel generic, even if we build it in the most tailored and bespoke way. When you bring it down to simplicity, it feels generic. So you've got to make sure that you create that conversation of the context around it. And I think that's the problem with values. It feels tidy, it feels pithy. We've got these 5 things, everybody can remember them, but actually we need to create something that allows the conversation to be more nuanced and helps people understand what that means in their own particular context, I think.
That's really, so it's such an adult kind of mature way of, which I think is where we should be as employers and as organizations, is adult. Doesn't always happen. Our egos get in the way. And the ability for a robust conversation about the reality of the context is sometimes difficult when you really your leadership teams potentially do want a sticky, or just create some behavioral things that we can all live by. So how do you even broach the conversation about what the context is really like? I guess, I'm talking as an HR professional, I will mostly be dealing with the leadership team, unless you're dealing with a really adult, kind of forward-thinking leadership team, which is not always the norm. How do you even broach approaching values in this way?
Yeah, well, and even when you are dealing with a really adult, mature, developed leadership team, defensiveness and fatigue comes in for people. I think by the time we get to the point where we just want some new values, generally what's happened is we are just so sick of other people's SH1T on this stuff. We're just like, why won't they just take responsibility? I've told them they need to do this and they're not doing it. So often the them and us piece is just so ingrained that what leaders are looking for is just a guide that pulls people into line. And I think the truth is that the deal at work has fundamentally changed, and a lot of leaders don't realize that yet. A lot of us, I would suggest, certainly I did, I grew up in a world where my boss told me what to do and I did it. My boss in my first job told me what color of suits I could wear, and I did that without even thinking about it. And I think there's a conversation here about preparing for the workplace that we've got now, but the workforce of the future as well. The people coming into into work now, as much as people want to say whatever they do, I've forgotten what the word is, but you know, they call everybody a bit lily-livered. You can tell I watch 90s cowboy movies, don't you? 80s and 90s, lily-livered. But snowflakes, that's the word. You know, everybody's snowflaking on it. But fundamentally, what's happening is that there's this definition that I don't think that people want to work any less hard. I think they want it to be worth it in a way that what worth it means to the new generations coming into work is fundamentally different to what it is for us. For us, it was getting a pat on our head and being able to get onto the property ladder. And so we have to support our leaders to start to understand that just saying JFDI doesn't work. So I think coming back to the title of our session today, you know, values don't change culture, systems do. So that's what we do. We focus with leaders on the system that they've created. So the decisions that they're making through their strategic planning, the way that they've set up resourcing, how they work together as a team. Yes, how they role model, of course, that's important, but it's more about how they show up in terms of those, you know, take something like personal responsibility. If a leader's moaning about that, we won't just go, well, how do we make those people more confident to make a decision, put it on them, or able to make a decision? We'll talk about, well, when something escalates, what happens? Do you just deal with it because it's quicker to get it off your desk, or do you push it back down and make sure that that person could do it themselves? So having the conversation with leaders that helps them see their role in this system and helps them see that actually every behaviour and decision that they make creates the consequences of employees' behaviours, that's the stuff that's important. And the other thing I would say is that values represent to me the promise that we make to our people. So not only are we saying this is how what we think we're doing is setting the expectation for people, but what we're really doing is saying this is how we'll act as well. You know, we're saying this is what everybody needs to do. So one of the first conversations to have with leaders is whenever they want to set new values is, but are you willing to do this? Because if you make this promise and you break it, it's going to get much worse around here. It's better not to make a promise at all than to make one and break it. So I think two places that I would take the conversation. One is, are you really going to back this promise that you're making? Because it's not just an expectation, it's a promise, and remember that. And then let's talk about, this isn't the only thing we can influence. What else can we look at, and what else can we tweak in the system to get people to act in a different way? So yeah, I find that helps. And once we build out things like deal sheets for people, which are saying, this is what you'll give, this is what you get, here's the reality check about what that actually means. When you put that in front of a leader and say, go and talk to your team about that, and say, that means I don't want you acting like this anymore, or I'm not going to act like this anymore, so that we can come together to deliver this. Suddenly it doesn't feel as scary for them. So sometimes you just got to get them to jump over the edge and then give them the tools to be able to have those conversations. And genuinely, we find people are relieved when they're like, oh God, it's this, it is this, it is this. It's not this impossible thing of me being curious and open all the time. It's actually that I will support you to investigate. If something goes wrong, I'll support you to understand it and learn from it and improve in the future. But I will also hold you to account if you've really made a mistake there, or you've made a bad choice, you know. But the deal allows those nuances that doesn't need black and white perfection, I guess, or aspirational stuff.
I just love the notion of having like a deal sheet. That's just so much nicer than, value, like you say, values on a wall. This is how we should all behave. Like a deal sheet. This is what you can expect from me, and this is what I in turn will get from, or can expect from an organization. It seems like a much more kind of open way of doing things. Let me know in the chat what your take on this is, if you've got any questions about it. Can you see how it could be like positive for your organization? Any challenges that you think might come about with it? And I'm interested, Paula, like to see that, like the impact, I suppose. So to me, it sounds great. I guess anyone who's going to be wanting to do things differently, or asking their organizations to do, their leaders to do things differently, they're going to want some kind of like evidence or impact analysis or something to say that it could definitely be different. So what do you see that's different in the organizations that adopt this approach?
Yeah, so two things really. One is about expectation alignment, so satisfaction and engagement. drops for a bit because you're resetting the deal. Let's be honest, whenever you do anything like this, and well, not always, actually, that's not true. Actually, in some places it moves very quickly. So we work with two types of organizations who really generally need to shift the deal. One is the deal's got really outdated, so it just doesn't fit with where the business is moving forward. And often it was really cozy and supportive, and mummy and daddy did everything, you know, at the top. So whenever you start to lift the new deal, engagement drops a bit because it's like, why isn't mummy and daddy helping me anymore? But then it lifts very quickly. In businesses like the example that I just mentioned, where there's a big change and it just doesn't feel right anymore, engagement lifts really quickly because people get it. They get it, they understand, and suddenly they're like, this is a realistic and this is a fair and this is a reasonable promise. So two things happen. For the vast majority of people, they start to lift, they get it. Your engagement, your satisfaction with leadership, etc., lifts because the promise is more aligned, the promise is more realistic, and we're not holding our leaders and our organization to this really unreasonable, outdated, unrealistic standard of what they should do. So that happens, which lifts people's energy, their connection, so performance lifts as well. The other thing that happens is regrettable turnover lifts. So for those people who've been stuck in neutral, just peed off, moaning, grumbling about stuff, it supports that. Well, two things really. One is good conversations to say, are you on board with this deal? This is what we're offering. So it's absolute transparency about who we are and what we stand for. So it forces that conversation of, are you in or are you not? And that will get a lot of people to jump and go and find a deal that's right for them. And it allows you to do that in a really supportive and transparent way. But also it creates that basis for really good performance management around behaviour and attitude. So it's not just about results. Because you're being really clear about what your expectations are, then you're much more able to drive that performance management. But I think the kicker to this is about our role as HR. I think the reason values have lasted so long is because they are something that HR can lift, and we can put them into the performance management framework, we can put them into the recruitment, we can do training on them, etc. We can plug the gap so it feels like the values are moved. They're not living, it feels like action on them is moving. And really what this kind of deal work is about is again maturing our relationship with our leaders, where we are standing in the power of being the true capability builders and orchestrator cultures of that we are, rather than the superheroes trying to bridge every gap. So we've really got to be able to, stand in that place of saying there are two rules around culture: what the leaders do day by day, which drives our ways of working, and what we do as HR to build the capability, the infrastructure, and the understanding within our business for those leaders to deliver what's required. So we've got to fundamentally shift what our value and role is in there. And that can be tricky because, particularly in a business where we've struggled to get progress, we inch more and more into the space of getting things done around this stuff because nobody else is. And we've got to hold that space and power around, I'm going to help you drive this because you're the only people who can. So that's the most difficult piece, is the recontracting and reset on that, I think, between us as HR leaders and our business leaders to get them to really get it, to be honest.
Well, that sounds so positive for the profession overall, right? Rather than
bring the revolution, absolutely.
So we had a question: what is your take on the role of line managers in this process, and how can HR manage both SLT expectations and empower line managers to deliver real change? Go.
Well, yeah. So that question probably gets to the heart of what I said previously. I think SLT expectation about what their line managers do is their problem. They're their line managers, they manage them, it's their responsibility to deliver what's required. Our job is about giving those people the tools and the capability to be able to do what's needed and plan realistically with our SLT around what's happening. But generally our action plans, I've been doing one this morning before this call, they have two streams on them: central services, and we include HR, comms and everything together. We don't pull our HR out separately on this. So what is central services doing to enable this change within the business, and what is the leadership cascade doing to make this real? So what we've got to do is drive accountability and understanding within our SLT that they have responsibility for making sure that their managers are having these conversations, they're doing it well, putting performance indicators in, like percentage of talent who are ready to be able to deliver at best. So we use a kind of ready to deliver metric. So we kind of break the talent into three: kind of ready, on its way, or disengaged and never going to make it. getting leaders to have to report on what that looks like within their talent, and bringing that up to SLT level so that leaders are responsible for the quality of talent and the quality of performance that they've got in their business areas is one of the things that you can do. Percentage of performance improvement plans and how they are actually moving. Again, putting that in front of the leaders as their responsibility. Yes, of course, we've got that business partnering role to make sure that they're doing that effectively and they've got the capability, but that isn't our metric, that's their metric. It's something that we can facilitate them to deliver. So it's fundamentally about shifting where that responsibility sits, and maybe doing that slowly. If you've been very much in the HR does this stuff and SLT just runs the business camp, you might have to do that slowly, or that might be a job in itself before you even start to activate the deal. But that's the bit of work that you've got to do first.
Fabulous. And it's gone so quickly. We've got like 2 minutes left. So if there are any questions, you want to jump in the chat, put them there. We'll do our best to answer. But Paula, so say I'm totally on board with this, and say I was in an organisation, I wanted to go out and do that, to implement it. What would be, other than get you in, of course, what would be like someone's first step in kind of adopting this new way of thinking about it?
Yeah, so first conversation that I'd want to have is I'd get my SLT in the room and say, what the hell's going on around here and what do we need to achieve over the next while, and how do we need people to show up to deliver that? So have that conversation first, and then say to them, well, how do you need to be to make that happen? So that's the absolute first step conversation. Anchor this in business goals, priorities. You know, colleague well-being, their connection is so important, but it drives us into the should do's. Start at performance, look at what that means in terms of how people need to be happy, healthy and connected enough to deliver that performance, and put the SLT at the front of it. So get yourself into that performance discussion and make SLT talk to you about that.
Fabulous time. Well, one thing that I really took from our session before was values can be about forcing alignment rather than building community. And I love ending on that note, I think, of thinking of our organizations as a community, and building a community is a very different approach to being an employer. And employing people. Actually making your organization a community, I think, is a really good starting point, and this feels like a very cool way of getting us to that point of having that kind of deal sheet. So thank you so much, Paula, for sharing all of your wisdom. Thank you to everyone for listening in as well, and for your comments. Apologies for, I'm going to call it puppy brain. I'm going now, I'm so excited. But don't forget to check out ULife, Make Insurance Cool, check out Paula, connect with us both, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.